I dropped to my knees mid-asthma attack, clawing at the floor as my lungs slammed shut. My younger sister held my rescue inhaler inches from my face, smiling like she was watching a show. "Gasp, loser," she whispered. Behind her, my parents watched and didn't move. That was the moment I learned you can suffocate in front of your own family, and they'll call it being dramatic. 19 years passed before I saw that moment again, this time playing on a courtroom screen. And just before the video ended, something happened that none of us were prepared for. My name is Abigail Carter, and for most of my life, I believed silence was the only way to survive my family. I grew up in a house in Seattle that always looked perfect from the outside: freshly trimmed hedges, polished windows, a front porch my mother decorated every season. But inside, the air felt thinner, tighter, like you had to earn every breath you took. Eleanor, my mother, ran the home the way some people run companies: strict, polished, no room for error. My father, Thomas, sat quietly in the background, a man who believed peace was maintained by never choosing sides. And then there was Vivian, my younger sister, the golden child, the one they said just needed a little extra attention. They never said what I needed. The older I got, the quieter I became. Not because I lacked opinions, but because I learned early that my voice only caused problems. At the dinner table, Vivian would talk about school projects or weekend plans, and my parents' faces would light up. Whenever I tried to speak, the energy in the room shifted. My mother stiffened. My father glanced at the clock, and conversation moved on, like I was never there. By 16, I'd mastered the art of disappearing. The only person who ever truly saw me was my grandmother, Margaret. She smelled like lavender and old books, and she had this way of listening that made you forget the world outside her living room. With her, I wasn't dramatic or difficult or invisible. I was simply Abigail. Some weekends, I'd escape to her place, helping her water plants or bake whatever recipe she was determined to perfect that month. She'd rest her hand on mine and say, "You're stronger than they know." Those words carried me through more birthdays than I care to admit, birthdays my own family often forgot. I remember turning 16 and waiting for someone to mention it at dinner. No one did. Vivian had a cheer competition that weekend, and the entire house was covered in posters and glitter. I sat through it quietly, telling myself it didn't matter that Grandma would remember, and she did. She always did. When I got into college, I left a thick envelope on the kitchen counter so my parents would find it. The next morning, it was gone. My mother never brought it up. My father said nothing. I called the admissions office myself to confirm I'd been accepted. Back then, I told myself these were minor things. Families weren't perfect. People got busy. But there's a danger in normalizing harm. Eventually, you stop noticing you're being erased. And 19 years later, when the past finally clawed its way back to me, I realized someone else had been paying attention all along. It started on an ordinary Tuesday evening, the kind of night where the world feels peaceful enough that you almost believe the past can't touch you. I came home from a long day at the office, kicked off my heels, made tea, and opened the stack of mail on my counter: bills, a flyer, a charity envelope, and then one that froze me mid-sip. A subpoena. It ordered me to appear in a Seattle courtroom for a defamation case, Vivian Carter Monroe, for Rebecca Torres. For a moment, I just stared at the name, my sister's married name, printed in bold at the top. I hadn't spoken to her or my parents in 3 years. Portland had become my clean slate, a place where no one called me dramatic or difficult or too much. But now the law was pulling me back into the orbit I'd spent half a lifetime escaping. I set the subpoena down, telling myself to breathe. I didn't know a Rebecca Torres. I didn't know what Vivian had gotten herself into. And yet some instinct deep in my chest, old, bruised, half-healed, began to ache. That night I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in years. I looked up my sister online. Rebecca's blog appeared within seconds. The headline mentioned workplace bullying, exclusion from meetings, credit stolen, rumors spread. Typical corporate cruelty until I reached the last paragraph. It said Vivian has a pattern that goes back decades. Ask her sister about the asthma incident. Ask why their family spent years making sure no one believed her. My breath hitched. I reread the words 3 times, my hands trembling by the second. No stranger should have known about that day, my knees on the carpet, my lungs collapsing, the inhaler held out of reach, the smirk. And certainly no one should have known about the years afterward when my family insisted I was dramatic, forgetful, emotional, when they turned every memory into something I imagined. But someone did. Someone had seen the pattern. Suddenly, little fragments I'd buried began surfacing like debris after a storm. Grandma calling me one night, confused, saying she hadn't heard from me in months when I'd left 3 voicemails that week. My college acceptance letter vanishing. Birthday cards returned unopened, the way relatives stopped asking about me altogether. A pattern, a coordinated erasure. I stepped away from my desk, pressing a hand against my ribs. For 19 years I had blamed myself. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I remembered things wrong. Maybe it was normal for families to forget, ignore, overlook. But this line in Rebecca's blog felt like someone striking a match in a dark room. I picked up my phone to call a lawyer to find a way out of testifying. And then I stopped. My family had spent nearly 2 decades making sure I had no voice. What would happen if for once I used it? I closed the legal pad on my desk and instead opened my laptop to search for a name I hadn't typed in years, a girl who once told me I saved her life, and who now might just help me reclaim mine. Her name was Nora Lawson. In high school, she'd been the quiet girl who carried a secondhand laptop everywhere and avoided eye contact with the crowd that orbited my sister. Back then, she'd been shoved out of friend groups, mocked for her clothes, ignored when she spoke. I wasn't popular enough to protect her, but I sat with her at lunch when no one else would. Years later, she'd become a digital forensics specialist in Portland, someone who spent her days recovering deleted records, piecing together digital trails people thought they'd buried. When I called, she didn't hesitate. "Bring anything you have," she said. "If they erased you, we'll unerase you." Her confidence steadied me in a way I didn't know I still needed. 2 days later, I walked into her office. The space was small but filled with humming equipment screens, glowing with lines of data processors stacked neatly on metal shelves. A place where truth didn't disappear just because someone wanted it gone. I reached into my bag and pulled out the only object I'd kept from my childhood home, a thin DVD in a paper sleeve, labeled in Vivian's handwriting, "Family Memories 2004. I had taken it with me when I moved out at 18, though I had never watched it. Even touching the sleeve made my fingers tense. Nora slid it into her system. "Let's see what your family didn't mean to save," she murmured. Within minutes, a small window opened on the monitor, the living room from my childhood home. The camera shook slightly as Vivian's younger voice filled the speakers, giggling as she zoomed toward herself in the reflection of the dark TV screen. My stomach knotted. I remembered that camcorder. She used to record everything, breakfasts, chores, arguments she wasn't supposed to hear. And then the footage shifted. The camera pointed at the carpet, my hand clawing at it, my body collapsing into frame, my voice rasping. I felt my throat tighten just watching. Vivian's voice, sharp, gleeful, cut through the speakers. "Look at her, she's so pathetic." The inhaler dangled in the corner of the frame. She stepped closer, blocking my desperate reach. Behind us, my parents on the couch, motionless. I swallowed hard, my palms pressed to my knees as if trying to ground myself. "That's enough," I whispered. But Nora's expression changed, not at the video, but at something else. "Abigail," she said quietly. "There's more." The disc wasn't just video. It held email archives automatically copied years ago when Vivian burned the DVD on the old family computer. Dozens, no hundreds of messages between my mother and my sister. Nora opened one. 2 days after the asthma attack, Eleanor. "Delete the video and don't mention it to Grandma. We need to keep up appearances." Vivian already did. I told her Abigail refused to come downstairs because she was being difficult again. "Eleanor, good. Keep it up. We can't let this ruin your relationship with her. Too much at stake." I felt something in my chest collapse. Not fear, not even grief. Recognition. This wasn't neglect. It was strategy. 19 years of my life rewritten by people who shared my last name. I straightened, wiped my face, and whispered, "We take this to the courtroom." Nora nodded. "And Abigail, you're not the one who should be afraid anymore." The morning of the hearing felt unreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's life. Seattle's courthouse rose above me in clean lines of glass and steel, reflecting a sky that couldn't decide whether to rain or clear. I tightened my coat around my shoulders, the cold spring air brushing against my skin as I walked through the doors. Every step echoed with a truth I'd spent 19 years convincing myself wasn't real. Inside the courtroom buzzed with quiet conversations, shuffling papers, the soft scrape of chairs being pulled back. Rebecca sat with her attorney near the defense table. She looked small in her blazer, but steady. When she saw me, her expression softened, gratitude mixed with fear. She had been bullied, yes, but she had also become the first person in years to speak my truth out loud. Then the doors opened again. Vivian entered. She looked exactly as I remembered: polished hair, tailored coat, perfect makeup, the image of a woman who believed she had built the life she deserved. Eleanor walked behind her wearing a calm smile she reserved for church committees and holiday gatherings. Thomas followed, last hands in his pockets, eyes cast downward. When Vivian saw me sitting beside the defense, her face froze. She blinked once, twice, as though trying to make sense of the impossible. Her attorney leaned in to whisper, and she straightened, masking panic with practiced confidence. The judge entered, and the room shifted instantly into silence. "Court is now in session," she announced. "We will begin with the plaintiff's testimony." Vivian stepped onto the stand as though she owned the air around her. She spoke in a polished, steady voice about her career, her reputation, the harm she claimed Rebecca had caused. She described herself as a supportive colleague, a generous mentor, a woman blindsided by betrayal. I watched her build a narrative, brick by brick, a tower made of polished lies. And then her attorney delivered the line that opened the door for everything to come. "Your Honor, the plaintiff wishes to demonstrate that these allegations rest on fabrications stemming from her sister's unstable history." The courtroom tilted. Vivian didn't glance my way, but I saw the tension in her jaw, the subtle shift in her shoulders. She intended to use me as her shield. The judge turned her gaze toward me. "Ms. Carter, the court acknowledges your presence. You are listed as a witness. Please approach." My pulse hammered as I stood, but Nora had prepared me for this. "Truth doesn't need theatrics. It only needs light," Vivian's attorney began the moment I was sworn in. "Ms. Carter, is it true that you've been estranged from your family for years?" "Yes," I answered. "And would you say your recollections may be influenced by emotional distress or unresolved issues?" "No," I said calmly. "My recollections are influenced by what actually happened." He smirked. "Isn't it true that your family expressed concern about your mental stability when you were younger?" "They expressed it behind my back," I replied. "Never to my face, and never with any professional assessment. It was not concern, it was a tactic." A murmur rippled through the room. My attorney stood. "Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce a set of documents authenticated by a certified digital forensic specialist." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Nora approached the screen at the front of the room. With a few keystrokes, she displayed the first email. The timestamp glowed in the corner. "Eleanor to Vivian, delete the video and don't mention it to Grandma. We need to keep up appearances." Gasps echoed around the courtroom. Vivian lurched forward. "That's taken out of context." Nora clicked again. "Vivian." "Already did." I told her Abigail refused to come downstairs. She believed it. "Eleanor." "Good. Keep going. Too much at stake." The judge held up a hand. "Ms. Monroe, you will remain silent while the evidence is being presented." Vivian sank back, eyes wide, breath shallow. Then came the line I had waited 19 years to hear spoken by someone with authority. "Before we begin," the judge said, turning to the room, "let's watch a family video." My stomach twisted, not with fear, but with anticipation. The truth was no longer mine alone to carry. The lights dimmed slightly as the footage emerged on the screen. Me at 17 collapsing onto the carpet, my fingers stretching toward the inhaler. The sound of my own gasping echoing through the speakers like a ghost dragging chains. Vivian's voice rang out, chilling and bright. "Gasp, loser." A few people in the gallery covered their mouths. On the screen, my parents sat motionless on the couch, watching, not moving, not helping. The judge's expression tightened. Rebecca's attorney looked stunned. Even Thomas closed his eyes, shame radiating off him like heat. But Eleanor didn't look away. She stared at the screen with a cold stillness that chilled the room. Then the camera caught something else, a reflection in the glass cabinet. Vivian holding the inhaler behind her back, smiling. When the video ended, the silence was so thick I could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Vivian rose unsteadily. This is edited, this isn't... But her voice broke. Her hands shook. And then, exactly as the thumbnail described, she trembled and started screaming. You don't understand what it was like. She was always in the way, Mom said. Mom said, Ms. Monroe. The judge cut in sharply. Sit down. Her screams dissolved into panicked sobs. Eleanor reached for her, but Vivian jerked away, unraveling in front of everyone. For the first time in my life, I witnessed the truth strip away every layer of their carefully crafted image. The judge cleared her throat. Based on the emails, the video evidence, and the documented pattern of behavior described in testimony, the court finds that the plaintiff's claims lack credibility. Furthermore, the evidence strongly suggests a long-term pattern of psychological mistreatment within the family. Vivian whimpered into her hands. Eleanor sat frozen fingers curled tightly around her purse strap. Thomas stared at the floor, shoulders hunched as though the weight of decades had finally settled on him. The judge continued, voice steady. This case is dismissed. Costs will be assigned to the plaintiff. The implications of these documents will be referred to the appropriate civil courts for separate review. The gavel struck. A sound like a door slamming on an entire chapter of my life. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. As the courtroom dispersed, Vivian sat collapsed in her chair, mascara-streaked breath shaking. Eleanor remained stone still. Thomas approached me softly, voice barely audible. Abigail, he whispered. I'm sorry. I met his eyes, and for once he didn't look away. You should have been, I said gently, a long time ago. Then I walked out of the courtroom, leaving their silence behind me, stepping into a future finally free of theirs. The civil court proceedings that followed moved slower than the trial, but the outcome carried a weight I still feel in my bones. The judge reviewing my grandmother's estate examined every entry in her journal, every email Nora recovered, every instance where my mother and sister had painted me as unstable or uncaring. What emerged was a pattern so deliberate it no longer surprised me, only clarified what I had spent years trying to name. In the end, the ruling was clear. The original inheritance had been influenced by deception. Vivian was ordered to return roughly $180,000 in assets she'd already folded into her life renovations, a car weekend retreats. For a woman who'd built her identity on being the favored one, the financial blow was nothing compared to the public unraveling. Her employer launched an internal review. Her husband filed for separation. By summer, she was living alone in a small apartment across the city. Eleanor didn't lose money. She lost something she valued more, her reputation. The community she'd cultivated for decades, the church groups, the neighborhood circles, the polished image of a devoted mother collapsed under the weight of her own words, preserved in email archives. Invitations disappeared. Conversations stopped. She became a woman people whispered about instead of admired. As for Thomas, he reached out once more, this time with honesty. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for understanding, and I gave him the only thing I could space to start over, but not walk back in. And me, I finally exhaled. I created the Margaret Carter Fund, a small foundation helping survivors of family psychological abuse rebuild their lives. It felt like giving back what my grandmother had given me, proof I was never invisible. In the months that followed, I learned something simple but life-changing. Family isn't defined by blood, but by the people who see you, believe you, and refuse to let you disappear. My past didn't vanish, but it no longer owned me. I finally breathed freely, not because my lungs were stronger, but because the truth was. If my story resonates with you, share your experience in the comments and hit subscribe. You never know who might need your voice today.